This happened around sometime last year. I was working the night shift at a gas station, a job that brings you face to face with all kinds of people, from the harmlessly eccentric to the deeply unsettling. You learn to stay alert, to sense when something's off. That night, my instincts were screaming. It was around 2 a.m. when a small red car pulled into the station. The engine idled, headlights casting long, eerie shadows across the pavement, but no one got out. I watched from behind the counter, the uneasy feeling growing stronger with each passing minute. The car sat there for about 20 minutes before the door finally opened and a girl stepped out. She was young, barely out of her teens, with disheveled hair and clothes that looked slept in for days. Her eyes were wide, pupils dilated, and she moved with a jerky, unsteady gait. My heart raced as she walked towards the door. I could tell she was under the influence of something. Probably drugs. She pushed the door open, the bell above it jingling softly, and approached the counter. "Do you have any bandages?" she asked, her voice a hoarse whisper. The sight of her made my skin crawl. She looked desperate and scared, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the counter. I quickly grabbed a box of bandages from the first aid kit under the counter and handed it to her, eager to get her out of the station. "Thank you," she muttered, not meeting my eyes, and rushed back to her car. I watched her leave, a knot of anxiety tightening in my chest. She got back into the red car, and it drove off, disappearing into the night. I tried to shake off the encounter, telling myself it was just another junkie passing through. Less than half an hour later, the unease returned when a small truck pulled up to the station. 2 men got out immediately, one young and rugged, the other older, maybe in his 60s, with a hard, weathered face. They entered the station quickly, their eyes scanning the place as if searching for something, or someone. The older man gave me a suspicious look, his eyes cold and calculating. He approached the counter, leaning in close enough that I could smell the stale tobacco on his breath. "Have you seen a small red car pass through here?" he asked, his voice low and menacing. My heart pounded in my chest, fear gripping me. Something about these men screamed danger. I lied, hoping to get them out of the station as quickly as possible. "No, I haven't seen anything like that," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. The older man stared at me for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether I was telling the truth. Then he nodded slowly, and the 2 men left without another word, climbing back into their truck and speeding off into the night. I was left standing behind the counter, my hands shaking. I didn't know what their intentions were, but I was certain they were bad. I was relieved they were gone, but the uneasy feeling lingered long after they left. A week later, I was scrolling through social media when a video caught my eye. It showed a small red car engulfed in flames, burning fiercely on the side of a deserted road. The car was charred and unrecognizable, but something about it seemed eerily familiar. My heart sank as I realized it was the same car the girl had driven. I hurried to the station's surveillance room and pulled up the footage from that night. There it was, the same red car, the same license plate number. I felt a chill run down my spine. I had to tell the police everything. I contacted the authorities and explained what had happened that night. They took my statement and reviewed the footage. The girl had been reported missing, and the video of the burning car was their first real lead. A detective came to the station a few days later to ask more questions. He seemed particularly interested in the 2 men who had come looking for the car. I described them as best as I could, and he left promising to keep me updated. Weeks went by, and the station returned to its usual routine. but I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened that night. Something I had been unknowingly caught up in. The girl's haunted eyes and the men's cold stares stayed with me. Reminders of a dark night that changed everything. I never found out what really happened to the girl in the red car, but I learned one thing. Some encounters are more than just unsettling. They are warnings, glimpses into a world of shadows and danger that lurks just beyond the edges of the everyday. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. Working night shifts at a hotel can be an eerie experience, especially when the building is nearly empty. My story unfolds in the shadow of the pandemic, when the once bustling hotel had become a ghost town. My job was primarily guarding the building and receiving the minimal guests that trickled in. But the calm was deceiving. I soon found myself entangled in a mystery that defied explanation. The hotel had a story about an old man who had stayed there and died before I started working. It was one of those tales that the staff whispered about, more a piece of macabre folklore than a genuine concern. That is, until strange occurrences began to happen. One particular morning, around 5 a.m., a guest approached me at the reception desk, his face pale and eyes wide with fear. He asked if an old man was staying at the hotel, describing in detail someone who matched the deceased guest. The man explained that he had seen the old man wandering the hallways and had even tried to help him back to his room. When I informed him that the person he described had died years earlier, he went even paler, visibly shaken. The guest's account unsettled me. But it wasn't long before the hotel delivered another dose of horror. A few weeks later, I was at the reception desk with a colleague. It was late at night and the hotel was silent, except for the occasional creak of the building settling. Suddenly, we heard a voice. It was low, gravelly, and filled with pain, echoing through the empty corridors. We froze, listening in disbelief. Then came the sound of a heavy door opening and slamming shut with violent force. My colleague and I exchanged horrified glances. The doors in the hotel were solid and heavy, designed to withstand any draft. We knew there were no open windows or air streams that could have caused such a commotion. With trembling hands, I pulled out my iPhone and started recording. We followed the sounds, our footsteps echoing eerily through the deserted hallways. When we reached the source of the noise, we found one of the heavy doors swinging on its hinges, moving as if someone unseen was pushing it. The video I recorded captured everything. The voice, the door slamming, and even the papers in the lobby rustling and moving in the opposite direction of the supposed airstream. It was as if some unseen force was manipulating everything around us. We searched the area thoroughly, looking for any logical explanation, but found none. Every window was shut tight, and there was no sign of anyone else being in that part of the hotel. When we reviewed the hotel's CCTV footage later, we discovered that the segment capturing the incident had been deleted. No one could explain who had erased it or why. It was as if someone was trying to cover its tracks. The only remaining evidence of the event was the video I recorded on my iPhone. The days and nights that followed were steeped in a deep, unsettling tension. The hotel seemed to hum with an undercurrent of unease, as if it held its breath, waiting. Night shifts became a trial of nerves, with every creak and shadow feeding my growing fear. One night, about a month after the first incident, I was alone at the reception desk. My colleague had stepped out for a moment, leaving me to fend off the oppressive silence. The minutes dragged by, and my eyes kept darting to the hallway where we had heard the voice. The atmosphere felt heavy, like storm about to break. Suddenly, the lights flickered and the temperature dropped noticeably. I could see my breath fogging the air in front of me. The sound of footsteps echoed through the corridor, slow, deliberate, and unnervingly close. I gripped the edge of the desk, my knuckles white with fear. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped abruptly. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A shadow, arc and indistinct, flitted across the hallway. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned to face it, my phone ready to record. The shadow seemed to solidify into a vague, human-like shape. For a moment, it hovered at the edge of the light, then dissolved into the darkness. I blinked, trying to steady my nerves. When I replayed the video on my phone, the shadow was there, faint but unmistakable. This time, I decided to keep the footage to myself. I didn't want it mysteriously disappearing like the CCTV footage. In the following weeks, the disturbances grew more frequent. Doors slammed, objects moved on their own, and disembodied voices echoed through the halls. Guests began to complain of strange occurrences in their rooms. Lights turning on and off, items disappearing and reappearing in odd places. The hotel's reputation started to suffer, and management was at a loss for how to address the issue. One particularly harrowing night, I was making my rounds when I heard what sounded like someone sobbing. The sound was faint at first, but grew louder as I approached one of the older, less frequently used wings of the hotel. The sobbing was coming from a room that had been vacant for months. With a shaking hand, I unlocked the door and pushed it open. The room was dark, and the sobbing abruptly stopped as I stepped inside. I fumbled for the light switch and flipped it on. The room was empty, but the air was thick with an unexplainable sense of sorrow. I took a step forward, and the door slammed shut behind me, plunging me into darkness. Panicked, I turned and yanked at the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. My phone's flashlight barely cut through the gloom, casting long, eerie shadows. Then, in the dim light, I saw them, handprints on the mirror, slowly appearing as if an invisible hand was pressing against the glass. The sobbing started again, right behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. Finally, the door swung open, and I stumbled out into the hallway, gasping for breath. My colleague, who had heard the commotion, came running. Together, we inspected the room, but found nothing out of the ordinary. Yet, the handprints on the mirror remained, a chilling reminder of the presence that haunted the hotel. The next morning, I showed my boss the footage from my phone and recounted the night's events. They were skeptical at first, but the sheer volume of complaints from guests and staff forced them to take notice. For a while, the disturbances ceased, and life at the hotel began to return to a semblance of normalcy. Guests stopped complaining, and the eerie occurrences dwindled, but the sense of unease never fully lifted. I could still feel it, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to resurface. To this day, the memory of those nights haunts me. The unexplained phenomena, the ghostly encounters, and the chilling voice of the old man in pain. They remain etched in my mind. Working night shifts at the hotel has become a test of courage, a constant battle against the unknown. And every time I hear a door creak or a shadow flickers in the corner of my eye, I wonder if the old man's spirit still roams the halls, forever bound to the place he could never leave. I never thought much about the tales old-timers shared about the night shift. As a correctional officer, I prided myself on my rationality, my unflinching adherence to the real and the tangible. But that all changed the night I met something I couldn't explain. It was a quiet Thursday night, the kind that drapes itself over the prison like a suffocating blanket. The air felt thicker, the silence more oppressive. The prisoners were locked in their cells, and the humdrum rhythm of their nightly routines created a sense of uneasy calm. I started my rounds with a flashlight in one hand and a cup of stale coffee in the other, walking down the dimly lit corridors. I remember hearing footsteps echoing through the halls, footsteps that didn't match the pattern of mine or any of my fellow officers. It was as if someone was shadowing me. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to my imagination, playing tricks on me. But the feeling of being watched persisted. I continued down to cell block D, known among the officers as the Black Hole, because of its history. The stories told about cell block D were more like urban legends, whispered over the years to spook the newbies, prisoners who lost their minds, guards who met untimely ends. None of it ever proved true, or so I thought. The lights flickered as I entered, casting eerie shadows that seemed to stretch and morph with each flicker. My flashlight beam pierced through the darkness, but even then, it felt like the shadows were fighting back. I stopped by cell 47, notorious for housing some of the worst offenders. That's when I heard it. A faint whisper, like a breeze snaking through the bars. The voice was soft, almost gentle, but the words were impossible to make out. I shone my flashlight into the cell, expecting to see one of the inmates playing a prank. But the cell was empty. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a drum of mounting fear. I radioed in, but all I got was static, a crackling that sent chills down my spine. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. The cell door, which should have been locked tight, swung open, slowly, with a low, creaking groan. I stepped back, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The whispering grew louder, and this time I could make out the words. "Get out. Leave now, before it's too late." I spun around, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the corridor. The whispers seemed to come from all directions, surrounding me. My breath quickened, misting in the cold air of the prison. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure. A tall, shadowy form standing at the end of the hall. It had no discernible features, just a silhouette that seemed to absorb the light. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. The figure began to move toward me, gliding rather than walking. As it approached, the temperature dropped further, and the air felt like ice against my skin. My mind raced with questions. Who or what was this thing? How could it be here? In a maximum security prison, when it was just a few feet away, I finally found the strength to move. I bolted down the corridor, my footsteps echoing like gunshots in the silent halls. I didn't stop until I reached the guard station, panting and drenched in cold sweat. I tried to explain what I saw to my colleagues, but the words sounded hollow, even to my own ears. They exchanged glances, humored me with nods, but I could see the disbelief in their eyes. One of the senior officers, Johnson, patted my shoulder and said, "It's just the night shift. Stevens, it gets to all of us." But I knew better. That night, I saw something that wasn't meant to be seen. Something that lingered in the shadows of cell block D. I never took another night shift after that, and every time I pass by that old block, I swear I can still hear the whispers, warning me to stay away. Believe what you will, but the night shift changes you. It reveals things better left in the dark, things that challenge everything you thought you knew about fear. I've seen it, felt it, and I know one thing for sure. Some shadows aren't cast by the light. They live and they wait.